Welcome to the in-between,
where shift happens,
the moment between where we are
and where we are going.
We will ask all the questions,
maybe find some answers,
and generally work at being okay.
In the mystery of the in-between.
And today we are talking about trusting the process.
Ooh, yeah. Dun dun dun.
So I don't know if this is a joke that we made up or if this is something that's actually like been going around the internet, but a while back one of us was like, do you think the process knows like how many people are trusting it? And just kind of raised some thoughts like, yeah, good point. Like,
good point.
Have we ever has anyone ever talked with the process? Like, what should we be trusting the process?
Yeah, for real.
Like, what? Why are we trusting it? So
is it trustworthy?
Right? Yeah. Seriously, is it even trustworthy? But I thought with like what seems like so much life going on for I think everybody I know. Everywhere I turn, it's like life piled on top of life just happening for like everybody without pause, without break, without respite. And it's like, oh my God, can we just time out for a minute, and it does come up a lot, this idea of like, hey, well, just, trust the process. It's working out. It's doing its thing, whatever. And I thought, God, this has got to be something we've talked about before, and I'm sure it's come up, but we actually haven't done an episode on it yet. So I thought that this would be a perfect topic for today.
Yeah, why not? We're going to trust this process, right?
Yeah, we're trust this process. And in a way, that's actually what this whole podcast is about. So if you are new here, this is the in-between where shift happens. And the whole shtick for this podcast is that we have agreed on a topic, or at least conveyed a topic to each other at some point before we started, maybe right before we started. But one of us comes with questions that the other has not heard before, and so we bring them up on the spot to answer them in that space in between knowing and unknowing, or knowing and not knowing. And this is that place to be, in the middle, in between. It may be uncomfortable, it may be the unusual, but it's really that stuff that I think typically doesn't get talked about a lot or expressed publicly a lot. And this is the space to do that. So let's jump in, trusting the process. So I think we got to start with what even is the process? When somebody says trust the process, like, what does that actually mean?
Well, I don't know that there's one meaning. I think for me, I can only answer for myself, but I think that for me, it's twofold. One, I think the process is that just the mystery. It is this idea that we cannot know all the things, and probably shouldn't know all the things, right? And so it is that thing that is always moving, it's, and you really can't put your finger on like what it is, right? But you can look outside, and like the natural world, and things are always moving at varying speeds, right? And so I think for me, it's this understanding that there is always something going on.
Yeah.
There is this, just because that is the nature of this incarnation, that's the nature of like life, the cyclical understanding of life, is that it's always moving.
Yeah.
And, I think sometimes we think, well, trust the process. It's always working for good. Well, whatever that means, right? And so then I think, all right, well, then we have to talk about what is the good. And so for me, the good is the same thing as the process. The good is not this understanding of good and bad. So by saying the word the good, it's not putting a label on something or making a judgment of something on
kind of just a name we've placed on the thing.
Right. Yeah. And so I think for me, it's this idea that there's always something moving. There's always something changing. That change is the only thing that really exists. And I think that when we are speaking of like trusting the process, sometimes that doesn't mean that there's always an outcome we're super excited about, right? But it is kind of stepping into a flow instead of a resistance. So it's an expansion instead of a retraction.
Yeah.
That's a long answer for what the question you just asked.
I think it's a great answer. And I guess the other part of the question is like, should we be trusting the process? And I think what comes up for me is that there may be different versions of the process. Like the process is kind of like microcosm, macrocosm. It's kind of like a hologram thing where there are miniature versions of, quote, the process, like happening in any moment. And then there's also like, I don't know, I guess like the process of life, like the totality of everything is moving and changing and whatever. And I think it's easier for me sometimes to look at that microcosm process and make more sense of it than the bigger macro process. And this comes up like I do some adjunct teaching at a local high school with some of the band stuff and teaching music to kids. When kids are doubting themselves, it's like, all right, trust the process that we've developed here for learning.
Like the framework.
The
framework.
The framework that we have worked on and built up over, years, decades.
Like a container.
Yeah. And I think that there is some relief in that. It's like, oh yeah, okay, cool, right? Like, I doubt whether I'm going to be able to play this part or not in a month. And it's like, I got you. Like, we've been doing this for a while. I know this seems new, but like, let's trust the process that we have a system for working on this to get you to the point where you will be able to play this in a month or even less, right? And so that kind of is an analogy for me for like bigger picture stuff.
Oh yeah.
But also, when we say trust the process, it's like, I don't know that the process always works out that way in like the bigger picture thing. Like, it's easy in that kind of self-contained version of it, right? Yeah, we have developed this framework and system for teaching music that works. And we're going to get you to where you need to be, or trust us that we're going to make the adjustments along the way, which is also part of the process. But like looking out at life, I think it can feel like a privileged take on things to be like, oh, just trust the process. Trust that you're not going to end up at the wrong end of
systems and frameworks,
systems and genocides and murders and I don't know, whatever else is possible, because all of those things are possible. You can trust the process all you want, that those things still happen to people, right? So it's like, is this something we should be trusting?
Or, that brings up interesting, because I think when we talk about, and I know all these are words, right? This is just words and meaning.
Right.
And meaning that we have associated, but for the purpose of our conversation, when sometimes when we think of this idea of trust the process, it seems like it is, and maybe this is just my own feeling, it is kind of entrenched in possibly this Judeo-Christian understanding of this something outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
To trust in, right? And many people who have stepped out of that and maybe have stepped away from that sort of understanding, it's still this kind of bridge connection, because that feels safe to say there is something out there that I can trust in, instead of trusting in my own sort of whatever. And so I wonder if, for me, now I'm just thinking about it, is instead of trusting the process, it's being actively involved in the process.
Yeah.
Because I think that speaks to what you're saying, because it's such a privilege to trust the process when the process is working for you.
Right.
Or the processes that we have created are working for you.
Yeah.
But what is it when it isn't, right? And there's lived experience. And so then I think what happens is, instead of this passive trusting in something out there, this activity of being involved in the process then lends itself to responsibility that we have to create a process that is supportive of everyone, to create an understanding, that container, that supportive process that supports our growth, supports our evolution, our understanding, that creates that container. So then maybe instead of the process being out there to trust, maybe we're trusting ourselves and our own ability to create the process.
Because right, we're not actually separate from the process. There is no the process out there. There's we are the thing.
Well, then it's kind of, we want that something to blame over there if something doesn't work.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And as that historically, it's been so easy. I think that's a lot of that good versus evil sort of thing comes from, right? Oh, we can just blame this evil presence for the way that we behave in the world. So it's
yeah. So I'm finding it a lot easier to put trust in the process when I know what the process is, like the process of whatever the of is, like the process of my own growth. Yeah, I can certainly, I understand what that process is like, and I can certainly trust in the fact that my personal growth continues happening regardless of what is showing up in my life, right? Regardless of what's in front of me, I can trust in the process of my own growth. It doesn't necessarily mean I have to I don't know, trust that whatever is going to happen is going to feel good. Right? Like maybe there is a misplaced trust, I think, or I'm wondering if we trust the process where it's kind of an open-ended, undefined thing, is maybe can be a little bypassy or a lot bypassy of like, oh, just trust the process. You'll be fine. Life will work out for you. It'll be great. It's like, well, maybe.
Well,
and also I think it highlights a different concept of like when we remove ourselves, when we remove like the humanness from the center of our perception of life, then it's a lot easier. I can trust the process of life that it is going to work out for itself. Maybe that's not the greatest thing for like us as humans, right? Like life on Earth, on planet Earth, like global warming, we've had this like save the planet thing, like, right, I remember, the 90s, like save the earth kind of thing was the campaign. And then it's like, no, the earth is going to be fine. We might, like, it might not be a place that's hospitable for us anymore, but the earth is going to be fine. It's done this for a really long time. It's going to be great. It'll be fine. So I can trust like the big process that in the end, yes, everything is in fact working for its own good. That doesn't necessarily mean that, from our human pedestal version of things, that it's going to work out really well for each one of us all the time. So I think there's like a difference in perspective there. Yes, I can trust in that, and I'm not sure how much relief that brings.
Right.
I don't know. That's very helpful.
Well, and I think I think that's challenging. I mean, if you think about, our bodies as like this kind of the microcosm of the macrocosm, right, of life in general. I think there's been oftentimes in my life where, and I'm sure people can relate to this too, is like my body feels different and it's hard to trust my body knows what it's doing, right? And so it's like this, it's really interesting. And we know that in any sort of experience, the body is always seeking balance. I mean, that's just what it does.
Yeah.
Because and I think that balance is different for everyone. So that looks different for everyone. There's no ideal body in function or size or any of those sort of things, right? So whatever your unique balance is, the body is always trying to do that. And so it's just and I think sometimes it's just hard to trust because I think we want so much control over our own experiences. And I think it's that illusion of control, right? So it is sometimes hard to trust, especially when we are in times of imbalance, whether that's, physically, emotionally, societally, right? It's hard to trust. I mean, we're seeing that now. I mean, I'm finding it hard to trust that things are going to work out in a way that supports everyone, right? But so when I stand back as a spectator, I can look and say, wow, it's really hard to trust that these folk know what's going on and that things are going to. But then when I actually think, wait, if I'm actually an active participant in that, then I have a lot more trust in that. Because then I have trust in what is mine to do and how I can show up and how I can support, and trust in the people around, right? And so it's really interesting that um, it's not a spectator sport, I don't think, in the way
Right.
that we
Right.
have historically thought it was.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is kind of coming up for me then is I think there is a much larger trust conversation culturally that needs to be had at some point. Like I think culturally we don't have a lot of trust in each other, in individuals, in ourselves, in our relationships, in government, in business. And I think in most of those cases it's for really good reason. Um and so I'm kind of seeing that is also playing in here, that like is it a human desire to be able to trust something that feels outside of ourselves? Is that something that just we've learned like through that Judeo-Christian kind of tilt on life? um but what I'm wondering is, well, so a couple years ago met somebody who became a good friend who grew up in Russia, Russia, communist Russia. And during the fall of things, what they conveyed to me was that during the fall of all the things there, that the people had to learn how to trust each other again,
Mm,
because there was so much lying going on that you didn't know what was really true. And so you ask somebody how they're doing, and they'd be like, well, today's shit. I'm
right.
doing awful. This is bad, and this thing and this thing. And they come out and tell you all the things that aren't good. And you knew you could trust them
Mm,
because they weren't trying to, bullshit you. But the people who be like, oh, it's great, having a great day, the expectation or the assumption was they're lying. And
right.
so you to relearn as a society how to trust each other. I'm not suggesting we all go out and just start like spewing all the things that are wrong in our lives, because that can kind of lead to a toxic spiral. But I think there is some value in, ditching the pretending that like, oh yeah, it's great living the dream, or whatever. Just trust the process, right? Like that kind of mentality, of that bypassy thing. Like I wonder if there is a deeper value in just building trust in general, and building trusting patterns, habits,
Mhm.
relationships,
Yeah.
culturally. And I think that could probably look like a lot of things, but that's kind of like what I'm hearing is almost like the underlying thing here is like, I don't, there are certain, I don't know, processes or whatever happening like in the United States. And I'm like, I don't know if that should be trusted, or let's trust it for what it showed us and not how we talk about it. Like, I think we can trust the economic systems for what they are. Like, we can trust the system to benefit who it was designed to benefit, you know, and I'm not necessarily going to trust that it's going to benefit me all the time. It's going to benefit large corporations or billionaires or whatever, like whatever it was really designed to do, so I guess the question is, how do we practice building trust in the variety of relationships that we have as individuals? How do we build trust like as society? What could that look like? Because I think it could be a lot of things.
Well, and I think for me, it feels like building this trust in our ability to create,
Mm,
and to be the creators of life, instead of life, instead of being just uh, the um, the objects in which life is having its way with, right? And so
right.
I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we talk about uh, this a lot, that our ability to create the experiences of our life. And what we mean by that is not that we can control all the experiences,
Yeah.
or that we individually are responsible for all the experiences, but there is the things that exist in the world we have created collectively.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they would not exist. And so I think we see that a lot. The things that we create, we can also uncreate and recreate. And so I think that the more that we lean into this idea that just because we created something, a system, a way of being, a way of doing, a way of whatever 50 years ago, does not mean that there is not this power and ability to dismantle and recreate something different as we learn something different. And so I think for me, that's the way forward, is to understand to trust our ability to actually create the experiences that are supportive of everyone, because we can do it. Now it takes a collective it takes a monumental shift in our priorities and our understandings and our interactions, like all the things, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that could look very, very insurmountable when we look at the world, but it starts with our own sphere, our own little microcosm too, and then that begins to filter out. But I think it is that renewed understanding that we have the ability to create, and that if something is broken, if something is not working for folks, then we do have the ability, if we put our intention and our focus and our energy to create something different.
Yeah.
To I don't know, to step out of something into something else. I think for me, that is the trust, that sort of trust. And I think that is in a nutshell, kind of the process, is our ability to create.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important, that idea you mentioned, control. I think you mentioned it before too, that stepping away or stepping out of that perception that we must be in control, or even that we could be in control of life. I understand why that's so common. And I think that, not to be like pop psychology about it or anything, but like literally we've never met a human that's not been traumatized in some way by life, right? And so I think that need for control is a response from those experiences.
Right.
And so the need for control, I think so very often the response to that is, oh, just trust the process. And so I think that that's probably very well intentioned and misinterpreted, very bypassing, right? But what I'm hearing you say is like, we can step away from that need for control if we understand what the process really is, and that we can trust in it. We can trust in the fact that life is going to life. Life is going to be life. It's going to do the things that life does. And so instead of trying to fool ourselves or trick ourselves into thinking that we can control it and keep those things from happening, and then get devastated when they happen, right? If we can step away from that control or that need for control, then we can trust the fact that, yes, life is going to happen in the way that it does, and we can influence how it happens. We can certainly influence how we respond to it. And so maybe that's part of that process, right? That we are creative, and we are also the thing that is creating and being created, right? Like we are in it. We are in the process. We are part of the process. And so we get to respond. We get to change how we do things. We get to show up differently. And so maybe that's the process we trust, is like, we get to decide how we show up.
Right.
There are things that are going to happen. We're not going to love them all. They're not going to always feel good. They're going to be uncomfortable. And things are going to happen that we love, that are comfortable, that we do enjoy, that we would love to be enmeshed in all the time. And that we can trust that all of those things are going to happen, which feels like a totally different trusting the process than everything's going to be great because life is only good, or whatever that version of it is, right?
Well, and I think too, it's also this, and I have this, so I'm not saying that everyone else needs to figure it out, and I've already figured it out. It is this really unrealistic, and I'm not sure where it comes from, I think maybe just innate or something that we've evolved over time. This really tight grip on how we think life should show up.
Yeah.
And so if life doesn't show up in this particular way, the way I have envisioned, then then there's something wrong. And so I think that creates a lot of this sort of resistance when we expect life to show up a certain way. And what happens is when it doesn't, we don't have a lot of psychological flexibility, to use some psychology stuff, some psychological flexibility to deal with how life shows up.
Yeah.
And so I think important components of psychological flexibility is this understanding that life is going to show up in different ways. Life doesn't always show up in the ways that I want it to. That there is a need to we can't always have know everything, right? And so there is this openness to not have to know everything. There's this openness to experience new things that I may not know what the outcome is going to be, right? And so I think when we get really flexible in our understanding like that, then we're able to navigate the challenges that life brings in a way that is supportive on a larger scale, right? And that doesn't mean, we need to be super like, I'm not even saying be grateful for the challenge. I mean, you can like really think that they're shit, right? And be like, what the hell is going on? And I think that's okay, right? And so I think it is, for me, sometimes I have to ask, why am I so upset at this? Or why am I so off balance at this thing that happened? Or why am I so activated by this? And I have to think about it, why. I was like, okay, well, I thought it was going to be different. I thought that person was going to be different. I thought this experience was going to be different. I thought I was going to be different. And then really navigate that really gentle space in between what we thought was going to be and what is, because that really is kind of that's how grief plays in. Grief is any situation where life turns out differently than I thought it was. And so, honestly, I think we're in a state of constantly processing and integrating grief related to that.
Yeah.
And I think if we become more aware of that, we can be like, oh, that's why I had that reaction. That's why I had that response. And maybe what can I do differently? What can I let go of a little bit more? What can I open up to a little bit more in order to be more flexible in those situations?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, because it also requires a flexibility of our own like self-trust, like trusting me, building the trusting relationship I have with me. And I remember being asked, like in a classroom scenario years ago, about whether I trust myself. And I was like, yeah, of course. Like, yeah, I don't know. And I guess I just, it never really sunk in what that really meant until years later. And I think it's more about like, do I trust myself to be able to respond? Do I trust myself to be able to react in a way that is going to get me through this? Do I trust myself to, show up in a certain way, or, I mean, I think it's so many different things and it can be different for everybody. But I think there is a fairly universal experience of not really trusting ourselves to the extent that we're being asked to. And I think that is the discomfort of life, right? That is the in between, right? It's like, can you show up in this moment in a way where you're trusting yourself more than you have before? Right.
And I think we have to know, I think, and I think isn't a process. It's like a learning curve. I think the more that we know ourselves, and I think when I like know my motivations, know what's behind, know my defaults, know like what's supporting those default ways, like the more I know that, then the more I can be like, oh, okay. And then I can trust myself more. I don't know. So I feel like I trust myself more now than I ever have.
Yeah. There's different levels, right? It's not like you do or you don't. Like it's an ever evolving thing. Yeah.
Now, sometimes I don't trust myself to actually be able to respond in a way that's empathetic, depending on the situation, especially lately. It just seems like there's just a layered amount of stuff, but it's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think also I've started to, I don't always do it. I'm not always great at it, but I've started in those situations to realize that also is trust. Like, I am trusting myself to show up the way that I know I will probably show up in that moment. I am trusting myself I'm probably going to show up in a way that if I were to just say the thing I wanted to say, I'm going to regret it later, or it's going to lead to something I'd rather not deal with. And so I'm going to also trust myself to not respond right now.
Or to respond and deal with the fallout, right? And
or just do it anyway. Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know about you. This all feels totally crystal clear now that we've had this conversation and we've solved it all and figured it all out. I'm super clear on what the process is.
At least for I think I am a little bit for me, right? And I think it's this understanding that it's different for everyone. It shows up in different sort of textured for everyone. And that's good.
Yeah, it is.
That too is the process.
Right. Exactly. That this conversation is the process.
Yes.
The evolution.
We are all in process.
We are the process. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Cool. Well, thanks for having the convo. Thank you all for being here and listening and being part of the conversation. Also, we'd love to hear from you, whether you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or YouTube or wherever you're listening. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. What is your experience with trusting the process or not trusting the process, or what even is the process? So thanks for being here with us in the in-between. And until next time, we hope a lot of shift happens.
Nobody really enjoys being in the in-between.
But thanks for being here anyway.
We may not have found all the answers,
but certainly some. And maybe more importantly,
a little shift has happened.
And the beauty of it all is that we are not alone in the in-between.
So until next time, we hope a lot of shift happens.